So this end of the studio is my workspace. I have it set up so that I'm kind of working in a U over here with my wheel, and then a lot of times I work in a taller table, and then also have my lower table set up so that I can just work in this space over here without having to move around all that much. I also like the surfaces of all of my work tables as well as my shelves to have either drywall, sheetrock that I cover everything with, or the MDF surface. I've just found that these different materials absorb the clay really nicely without leaving any texture on the clay on the bottom of the pots. This is Willow, the studio dog. Okay, so at this end of the studio I have a couple assistants working. Generally I have 2 people working for me at a time, and they each get a wheel, a table, and a set of shelves for their work. And then we have a little bit of community space, our glazing area, which on the other side has bins for raw materials, the clay sink. I've also got a reclaim station here with pretty simple setup. Actually a ceramics monthly tip of the day, or tip of the month, with the table that pulls out for our plaster slabs, and then our slake down buckets. We can talk about these. Yeah. I've also been using these damp boxes quite a bit. I've got a couple different setup. I've just figured out to put the plaster on the bottom so you can just take the lid off without having to move the pots. Makes it much easier to get things in and out, and keeps pots nice and damp for quite a while, so you can work on them if you have things to do in between. Okay, now let's go out to the kiln yard. So this is my train kiln. I've got 2 different kilns. I'll talk a little bit about the train kiln first. I built this kiln in 2009, and it's a train style kiln that I fire for about 48 hours. So it takes me a full day, probably 8 to 10 hours to load the kiln. So this is the loading door here, and we generally start loading from what I consider the front of the kiln, and I'll load the back of the kiln, and then load the middle section as I'm scooting out. And that takes a full day, and then we'll fire it off in the next 48 hours. So we'll just walk over to the other side of the kiln, and I'll point out a few more details. So this is the main stoking door. We'll start the fire down here for the first maybe 12 hours of the firing. Once the wood burns up on the grates, which are about here, then we fire mostly through the main door. And I like to put a lot of wood through the kiln, so it takes 3 to 4 cords of wood for firing. And because I'm not glazing the outside surface of my pots, I need to put a lot of wood through to create a lot of wood ash and form the glaze on the surface of the work. So we'll also stoke in these two spots are what I call the side stoking zone. So we have a stack of pots right here, and then a little space, another stack of pots, and then a space, and then a third stack. So I'm putting this really skinny wood through these 2 ports, and that's just, it helps to bring the temperature to the back of the kiln and get hotter back there, as well as produce more wood ash on the work that's back here. Thanks for coming along on the tour. That's my studio in Kiln Yard.